Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Herbert C. Kelman Seminar on International Conflict. And my name is Donna Hicks, and I'm the chair. And would like to also tell you that this seminar is co-sponsored by the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs and the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. And yes, we do thank you for coming today to join us. I know you all have busy schedules, and we have people typically from all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We're just so happy that you're here to join us today. And we're very happy and delighted to have this talk today about the Israeli elections and to have Nadav Tamir, who is the executive director of J Street Israel and was an advisor to the Paris and is an advisor to the Paris Center for Peace and Innovation, to give his comments on the elections and the implications for Israel's democracy, implications for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and implications for the relationship between Israel and the U.S. So it's going to be a very rich conversation. We have a wonderful person addressing all these issues. But before I formally introduce Nadav Tamir, I would like to say that we are recording this session as always. And if you would like to hear and listen to the recording, you could go on the Program on Negotiation website and click on events, and you'll see this talk. It'll probably be up tomorrow. So if you're interested or want to tell some of your friends to listen to it, you can do that. So it's the Program on Negotiation website. And yeah, so Nadav Tamir, as I said, is the executive director of J Street Israel and an advisor for international and governmental affairs at the Paris Center for Peace and Innovation. Nadav serves on the steering committee of the Geneva Initiative and on the board of the MITVIM think tank for regional foreign policy. And as a diplomat, he served in the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., as well as consul general to New England. He held the position of policy assistant under three foreign ministers, Shimon Peres, Ehud Barak, and David Levy, and advised Shimon Peres as foreign minister and president. Nadav earned a BA in philosophy and political science from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, from which he graduated magna cum laude, and a master's degree in public administration from the Kennedy School of Government here at Harvard. And that was in 2004. He was also, at that time, a Wexner Fellow at the Kennedy School. And then following that, he served as the chairperson of the Wexner Israeli Alumni Association. So Nadav Tamir is going to be giving his remarks for about 35 to 40 minutes, after which we will open it up to you, the audience, and we would appreciate it if you could put your questions or comments in the Q&A function, not the chat. So, and then what will happen is I will read him the questions, and he'll respond to them one at a time. So without further ado, Nadav Tamir, we are thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Diane, Nicole, Riley, the Weatherhead Center, and the Program on Negotiations for hosting me. And it's good to be back at the Kelman Forum. I have known Professor Kelman and admired him both academically and as a mensch, as an amazing person, and spoke in his seminars. And I'm sorry that he left us because he was a real force of nature, and especially on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he had some amazing insights that we all need today. So I need to speak about the Israeli elections, and Donna said that she's happy that I'm going to speak on the Israeli election, but I have to say I can't be very happy speaking about those elections because the results are pretty frightening for me for anyone who believes that Israel should be a liberal democracy, and that Israel should find a way to achieve peace with the Palestinians around the two-state solutions. Those elections brought to power a coalition that is almost against everything that I stand for. So I'm not very happy to speak about this, but I will try to end up with some optimism of what could be done in order to save the two-state solution and the Israeli-Palestinian progress towards the end of the occupation and the two-state solution when I finish to describe what happened in the elections. So the elections in Israel, after several elections that we had, more than ever in the past, Israel was not able to get a resolution for quite some time. What happened in Israeli politics is that it became kind of split in the middle between the two camps, that one camp wanted Benjamin Netanyahu to be the prime minister, and the other camp did not want Netanyahu to be the prime minister. Some people describe it by left and right, but I'm not sure it is the right description. Definitely not in American terms, because in the anti-Netanyahu camp, you had some people who were right-wingers. For example, a party headed by Gideon Sa'ar that I like to compare them to the Lincoln Project in the US, people that were Republicans, but thought that Trump was bad for the Republican Party. So Gideon Sa'ar was from the Likud. All his career was in Likud, and he left Likud because he didn't think that Netanyahu should be prime minister again, not when he's facing accusations and in trial for 3 cases, and not because him, like many other Israelis, thought that for Netanyahu, the whole political game now is how to save himself from the political situation and the legal situation that he's in, and it's not about the future of the state of Israel. In the camp with Netanyahu that actually won the elections, you have several parties. One of them is the biggest party, which Netanyahu leads, the Likud party. Likud used to be headed by Menachem Begin in the past, and was created by people like Jabotinsky, who were conservative, but very much believed in liberal democracy. But that's not the case anymore. What happened to the Likud party in many ways is what happened to the Republican Party. It became a cult personality for one person, for Netanyahu. They believe that he is the magician who brought them so many wins, political wins, and also they believe that he is the statesman that could really represent Israel in the world and protect Israel from all its enemies. The Likud party is indeed the biggest one, but I will explain why this coalition that is now in negotiation to create the next government, the Likud is actually not going to hold many of the key positions. Because of the bargaining power of the other parties. Other two parties that are in this coalition are the 2 ultra-Orthodox parties. We have 2 of them in Israel because one of them is more Mizrahi or Sephardic Jews, and one is Ashkenazi Jews. For the ultra-Orthodox, this distinction is very important, even though for many of us in the secular camp, it seems very anachronistic, but it is still very relevant for them. And one party, the Ashkenazi one, is actually built from 2 different political parties. One of them is Hasidim, and the other is Lithuanians or Misnagdim, which is also inside baseball of ultra-Orthodoxy in Israel. It's not very important politically. The other bloc that ran together in the elections, but it's actually comprised of 3 different parties, are one that is headed by Itamar Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir is a Kahanist in his ideology and used to be part of the Kahana party. For those of you who don't know who Kahana is, Kahana was a Jewish supremacist who created the League for Defense in the US, actually, and then came to Israel to try to get into Israeli politics. But he was, but this Israel Supreme Court and even the Likud party back then thought that he could not be a legitimate politician because of his racism. But now he is very much in politics, and he is probably the politician that brought most of the votes to this bloc that is also has another party headed by Bezalel Smotrich, who is heading the kind of more extreme settlers and what we call in Israel nationalist Zionists. You know, for historic reasons, it's important to know that the ultra-Orthodox were not Zionists. Until today, many of them are not considered Zionist because they think that it is Zionism can only come after the Messiah comes. But they became part of the religious and right-wing camp because they want Israel to be much more Jewish than democratic, and in that sense, they're very much allies to the other 2 parties that I mentioned. Another small party that was part of this bloc with Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich is a party headed by Knesset member Avi Maoz, who is misogynist and homophobe, and actually his agenda is how to make Israel based on Jewish so-called family values, which of course are very anti any liberal and pluralistic value that I hold and many Israelis hold. The reason why those smaller parties than Likud have so much power on Netanyahu is because he needs them in order to create a coalition and in order to be prime minister. In an Israeli system, in order to be prime minister, you need the support of the majority of members of Knesset. Because the Knesset is 120 members of Knesset, you need more than 61. And this bloc that Netanyahu created is 64 members of Knesset. But without them, he could not be prime minister, and without them, he could not change the Israeli legal system, which he really wants to do, mainly to get himself out of trial, but also because some of his member of his coalition ideologically believed in what some people call today illiberal democracy, a democracy that is only built on majoritarianism. And this, you see this phenomena in other countries in the world. In Hungary, for example, you saw it in Brazil before Lula defeated Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was this kind of leader. And in many ways, this is what's going to happen to Israel. The first victim of this government, when it will be eventually, when it will become a government. Right now it's still in negotiations, but I don't think anyone think that those negotiations are not going to lead to government. So at some point Netanyahu will go to the president, to Isaac Herzog, and tell him, I have an agreement, and he will become prime minister. And the first victim of this new government will be the legal system of Israel. Now, there are several things that they want to do that will completely make the legal, the judicial branch of Israel much, much weaker, in order to make the government with the majority in the Knesset the decider without any checks and balances. which means very bad things in terms of minority rights, of course. So the first thing that they want to legislate is to create a situation where the Knesset can overcome any Supreme Court decision with a simple majority of 61 votes, which they have. And that means that everything they will do after that point, the Supreme Court will not be able to challenge, even if it means going after minority rights and things that are very dear to any democracy. And because Israel doesn't have a real constitution, we have some basic laws that this new law that they want to pass is going to make even those few basic laws not constitutional, because they will be able to change easily by the majority that the Knesset has. Right afterwards, they will probably try to fire the Attorney General, who is running the prosecution against Netanyahu in trial for 3 cases. And they will try to also change the way Supreme Court justices are being elected, in order to give the Knesset and to give them, the majority in the Knesset, the control over this committee. In Israel, this committee was always balanced by members of the opposition, by members of the current Supreme Court, by members of the Bar Association. But they want to make sure that they control this process in order to make sure that all the judges that are being elected to the Supreme Court support their views. And it's also very much similar to what Viktor Orban did in Hungary, when he actually controlled the Supreme Court and nominated judges that he would like and that agree with him. In terms of other things that I think most of you are very concerned, of course, about the geopolitical situation and the Israeli-Palestinian situation, this government is very bad news as well. For example, the power that the settlers will have in this government is unbelievable. We already know that some of the agreements between Smotrich, who leads those, the settlers and the extreme settlers, because not all settlers are like that, but the extreme settlers, he demanded to have control for the civil administration that making decisions on the life of Palestinians in the West Bank. And of course, that is a situation that will change dramatically, because until now, it was decided by the Defense Ministry, because the West Bank is considered by international law as a occupied territory. Then the Defense Ministry is in control. And of course, it all has to be temporary in order to be occupied and not annexed. But what Smotrich really wants to do is to start annexation, not only de facto, but de jure of the West Bank, or at least parts of the West Bank. And he really wanted to be the Minister of Defense, and I think the only reason why he's not going to get it is American pressure, because the Defense Ministry in Israel has very, very strong connections to the Pentagon and to the American administration, and the Americans told him, no way, we are going to deal with Smotrich. Ben-Gvir, who's going to become most likely the Minister of Internal Security, who actually is going to change the name to National Security, is going to be in charge of the police. He also asks, as part of the negotiations, to get more authority on the police than was before, but than the minister had before, because the police in Israel is supposed to answer to the law and not to a certain politician, just like your FBI. But he's going to get those authorities. And he is also going to be in charge of the border police, which is very, very consequential in what's happening in the territories and with the Palestinian situation. So the same Ben-Gvir, who used to be the provocateur in Jerusalem that created many of the problems in the most sensitive places in the Middle East and for billion Muslim around the world, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Haram al-Sharif, or the way we Jews call it, the Temple Mount, is going to be in charge of the police. And this could very easily get the whole Middle East in fire if he's now not only the provocateur, but the one who's in charge. The other party that I mentioned, the homophobic party, are going to be in charge of a certain authorities that were part of the control of the Ministry of Education, which is also very frightening. And already in the last few days, many mayors in Israel started to say that they're not going to accept the fact that the Ministry of Education or this authority by Maoz will stop the education of liberal values. And if the state will not pay for those liberal pluralistic content, they will do it themselves as the mayors. But we're going to have a real culture war within Israel. And in many ways, one of the distinctions between the Netanyahu camp and the other camp is this old debate in Israel that was not really completely decided, because we don't have a constitution, between those who think that Israel should be more Jewish and those who think that Israel should be more democratic. And for me, there is no contradiction at all. I think the country could be the homeland of the Jewish people and a democracy at the same time. But for them, those liberal values that are, brought from somewhere else do not fit with the way they understand Judaism. And for them, Judaism is not a peoplehood or a nationality, but only a religion. So for someone like me who feels very Jewish but completely secular, this is of course very, very frightening. Another thing that is going to happen, that the whole relations between state, what you call state and church, of course in Israel is state and religion, is going to be go back to control of the ultra-Orthodox, which were not member of the outgoing coalition. And that means that, for example, there will be no public transportation on Saturday, even though the public really support it. And also some laws about gay rights and other minority rights are going to be threatened, because the ultra-Orthodox are going to control the life of so many people who don't share their beliefs. So this is a very frightening picture, I know, and I'm usually the optimist because I do believe that despair is not a strategy, and we cannot give up this fight on Israel liberal democracy and on the prospects of peace. So in the time that I still have, I really want to say a few things about the silver lining and maybe what could be done. First of all, it's important to understand that the majority of the pro-Netanyahu bloc was achieved in many ways because the other camp was completely disorganized and had too many parties. Two of them did not cross the threshold. The threshold in Israel is if you don't pass 3.25% of the votes, you don't get into the Knesset. So a party like Meretz, who represent the values of many progressive Zionist Jews, did not cross the threshold. One of the Arab parties, Balad, did not cross the threshold. So even though the Arab votes percentage was up, but many of those votes got completely wasted. So it's important to know that this pro-Netanyahu anti-liberal bloc did win the elections, but in the popular vote, it was pretty much 50-50. And that means that if our camp will get organized, it can be changed. Just like Netanyahu was beaten the last time, after many demonstrations and a lot of civil society energy in Israel, we could do it again if we get organized, if we will have a vision that could unite the people against this new government. And in many ways, as you know, history is dialectic. Whenever you have a movement towards one side, it creates a backlash. And I believe that maybe the backlash that this government will create in being so extreme will give much more energy to the other side. The other thing that I hope will happen is that the international community will wake up. And I'm not talking about the internal Israeli issues, because that is an internal Israeli issue and not for the international community. But whatever is happening with the Palestinians is not only internal Israeli issue, and it should be an international issue, because according to international law, the West Bank is occupied territory. And the only reason why Israel has a legitimacy by the international community to control it is because it is based on the fact that eventually those occupied territories will be decided by some kind of negotiations, and there will be a border between Israel and Palestine. And when we had the former government, the change government, the international community was hesitant to pressure them, because they said, you know, if we'll pressure them, and this is such an eclectic coalition, we will bring Netanyahu back, and it will only play to the hands of the more right-wingers. Now this excuse is no longer there, and the international community has to wake up. Actually, the situation in the West Bank was deteriorating even under this former change government, because the change government made a decision that they're not going to decide on the future of the Palestinians, because they couldn't get into agreement. So they kind of left it in the air, believing that they could somehow shrink the conflict with some economic measures. But the situation on the ground got only worse, because in Israel, when you don't decide, eventually the settler on the ground decide, and they did decide. They were very active against the Palestinians, especially in Area C, and they were backed by the military many times, partially because the military DNA is to act against terrorism, and they didn't really know what to do when the terrorism came from the Jewish side. But also because I guess many of the ranks of the soldiers were supporters of the settlers, and their leaders, their officers, did not enforce the role in creating order in the territories. So now we have clarity. Now we don't have this change government that could say, you know, we're trying to hold the status quo. There is no status quo anymore, and the international community has to intervene, and especially the US. It's true that President Biden and the Democratic Party traditionally support the two-state solution, but for quite some time, they're not doing anything about it. And it's time that they will wake up. And especially after the midterm elections here, when it's clear that the Biden administration cannot move anything domestically, I think it's time to focus on foreign affairs. And we actually saw that on foreign affairs, the administration had much more success when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine in keeping NATO together and the West united against Russia. And I think that there are many low-hanging fruits for American diplomacy in the Middle East. We have a much more ripe regional context for any initiative. We have actually a consensus in the international community for the two-state solution, and it's about time that the international community will do two things in order to make the two-state solution feasible again. One is to recognize a Palestinian state, so that whenever we get back to negotiations, the negotiations will be much more balanced, and that the moderate Palestinians will feel that they have something, some vision, and the vision is not only in the hands of the extremists, and the same will happen in Israel. The other thing is to demand Palestinian elections and to create a legitimacy for the Palestinian leadership for both the West Bank and Gaza. If the international community is doing it, and it definitely needs American leadership, it could create a situation when the next time that Israelis go to vote, the plurality who support the two-state solution will vote this way, because right now, even though they support the two-state solution, they don't think it is feasible, and it is time to make the two-state solution feasible again, and the international community have to wake up. I'm getting signs that maybe it's time to go to questions, which I'll be happy to do. So I'm turning to you, Donna, to lead the Q&A, and I'll be happy to address whatever questions are out there.
Wow, that's a lot. It's a lot to take in, Nadav, and you did a beautiful job trying to make it all understandable for us. And I really appreciate your attention to, the nuance and the finer details as well. So thank you so much. I would like to ask a follow-up question, because, and then I'm going to open it up. We have a couple here from the audience as well, but you said that the silver lining would be to energize the opposition and to try to find some kind of vision to unite the people. And I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about that vision, because, we're suffering from the same thing here. We need a big vision to unite here in this country as well. So I would love to hear your thoughts about what that would look like for Israel.
Sure. So when you're looking in surveys that are trying to go deeper into what Israelis believe in terms of the issues, you see that there is majority that want to separate from the Palestinians, and as I said, plurality for a two-state solution. You see that there is a majority for more separation between state and religion. You see that there is a majority for more gay rights. And the problem is that that people don't vote this way because there's no leadership and vision that actually can articulate those liberal values into some kind of a coherent a program of a certain party. We tend to be much more divided in the left, while in the right, they go after the leaders no matter what, and we have our nuances. But I think that as we saw in what we call the Balfour demonstration, in the last time Netanyahu was in power, this camp could get organized, but I think that this camp needs also the help of liberals who care about this issue outside Israel. I actually think that for us, the more liberal progressive Israelis, to become from a minority to a majority, we have to join with two other groups. One of them is the liberal Arab Israelis, the liberal Palestinian citizens of Israel, that for too long there was kind of a divide, and this divide should be erased. Now, people might tell me, how come you as a Zionist join with parties that are not Zionist? But I say, listen, actually the flag that, for example, Ayman Uda is holding, even though he's not a Zionist, is exactly what I want for the future of Zionism, which is the end of your occupation. And the occupation, it's very important to understand. Israel will not be able to be both a homeland for the Jewish people and a democracy without a Palestinian state, because between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, there are already 50-50, and there will be a majority of Palestinians. So if we want to keep this character, and what I think is the gist of Zionism, we have to separate. And Ayman Uda, even though he's not a Zionist, he's for this separation. He's for a two-state solution. and is also for civil rights for the Arabs in Israel, which is, for me, another thing that Zionism promised in our Declaration of Independence. The other population or group that we have to join is the American Jewish community. In my role in J Street, I'm actually working on this connection. For many years, Jews in America didn't have that option to be able to keep their progressive liberal values and be Zionist and care about Israel, but now they have it through J Street, who believes that you could love Israel and you could promote Israel interests much better if you don't just say yes to whatever Israeli government says, and that the most important thing for Israel is not more planes or more tanks. We already have the strongest military in the region. What we really need is more diplomacy and a way to end the occupation, which eventually will be the end of our dream. So I think that if we hold hands with the Palestinian citizens of Israel, some people prefer to call them Arab Israelis, but they indeed Palestinians. They have this identity as well. And the majority of American Jewish community, I think that we will be able to eventually create a majority and influence the situation. But as I said, I think it's also time for the international community to wake up, and at least on the issue of what's happening in the Palestinian territories.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'm going to give you the questions from people in the audience. Camilla Novak wants to know, do you see the two-state solution as the only solution to bring long-lasting desirable results? Some time ago, we heard here a discussion promoting a confederation, which sounded like an interesting idea. What do you think about this possibility?
I think a confederation could be a way to implement the two-state solution. It could not be instead of a two-state solution. A confederation can happen only when there is a Palestinian sovereign entity, and then we could decide to go for confederation, and we could decide to make the border less harder. We could decide that Jews who live in Palestine will vote for the Israeli Knesset and vice versa. But first we have to, we can't have good marriage with the Palestinians before we have a good divorce. Yeah. And that's why the confederation for me is not an alternative to the two-state solution, but rather one of the ways to implement the two-state solution. There are some people that will tell you that the confederation cannot work, because if you will live the most provocative settlers in the other side, they will not ever accept the Palestinian sovereignty there, and that will only cause problems. There are other people who say, no, this is the only way, because it will be much harder to move so many settlers out of the West Bank. And this is a legitimate argument, but whatever the decision is, for me, it's quite clear that first the Palestinians need to get the same right that we have as Jews, to have our own state. And then we could do, Germany and France fought for many years, and eventually the war ended, and then they decided to become part of the European Union. But it was a sovereign decision. It wasn't just something that was, forced on them.
Okay, thank you again. We have a interesting question here by Peter Silverman. He says, is there an anti-democratic element to your view? It has been many years since there was a left government, and looking to foreign pressure and the strong Supreme Court without a constitution that places limits, it seems that your view seeks to impose your views from without.
No, I completely accept the results of the elections, unlike some people in this side of the ocean who did not accept the results of the election. And I'm not calling to do anything that against the law. I'm calling to do things within the law. I do believe that democracy is not only the rule of the majority. Democracy has to include also minority rights. And that's why you need those checks and balances that every healthy democracy has. I'm gonna fight for it in legal ways, not in illegal ways. and democracy doesn't mean that I have to accept what most people wanted, but I'm going to promote my views. I think it is completely legitimate. And just like in America, we saw what happened. Yeah, Trump won the elections, and eventually, wanted to create a situation where he will always win the elections, but the American democracy won. And I hope that eventually the Israeli democracy will win, and we will protect our democracy.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. Would you expect the reform, progressive, and liberal strands of Judaism in the US and elsewhere to defend and support a government which does not recognize them as Jews? Or is this likely to accelerate the split between liberal diaspora Jews and more extreme political government in the more extreme political government in Israel?
No doubt that this government is going to create a big rift. The way to look at it, in my mind, is, many people think that, the Jewish diaspora should support Israel. But the question is, what do you mean by supporting Israel? Supporting in Israel doesn't necessarily mean supporting whoever is right now in power. Supporting Israel meaning supporting Israel that for example, was announced by our Declaration of Independence, support Israel that was created as a homeland for the Jewish people, which means that Jews outside Israel has a voice too. So I actually think that the right way to support Israel is in doing what we do in J Street, which to be critical, not because we're against Israel, because we love Israel. And some people ask me, so why are all those Jews focused on the bad things that Israel do and not or what China is doing? And I'm saying, because we care deeply about Israel, because we see it as our home. We love this place. And our criticism is a form of patriotism. And this is what I hope that the majority of American Jews, and we know we just did a survey on American Jews' positions, and we know that American Jews' positions are very, very much different than the government that was just elected in Israel. So I want to hear that voice very loud and clear, and to say, yeah, we're not, Israel is always right or Israel is always wrong. We support Israel in a way that we believe that Israel should be, as a model for social justice, for minority rights, and everything that we believe that our state should be.
Okay, thank you. Michael Siegel wants to know, what position is the new Israeli government likely to take with regard to support of Ukraine?
The Israeli dilemma, which some people don't understand, is a real dilemma between values and interests. Just like, the NATO countries support Ukraine, but they're not supporting Ukraine within Ukraine. They don't put NATO soldiers because they don't want another war with Russia. Israel has also legitimate concerns because Russia controls the airspace of Syria. And that's why it's not so trivial to say, okay, we will give Ukraine whatever they want, because that means that the Russian will give Iran and Syria whatever they want. So I think also the Biden administration understand the Israeli dilemma. What's going to happen when Bibi is back to power is that on top of the interests that are completely legitimate, there will be an ideological alliance between him and Putin. Netanyahu believes in this kind of so-called strong leaders, like Putin, like Trump, like Duterte in Philippines before he left, like Bolsonaro, like Orban that I mentioned. So I think that Putin will find an ear in the Israeli government that is not just about the legitimate concerns of Israel, but much more than that. And instead of Israel being part of the West in rejecting the aggression of Russia, I think we will find ourselves more in the other camp. Of course, there are many levers for America because, we much more rely on the US in so many ways. And the question is how the Biden administration will balance this tendency of Netanyahu to be more aligned with Putin ideologically.
Mm-hmm. Well, another anonymous person wants to know, he says that he's concerned about how Netanyahu will deal with Iran. What are your thoughts about this possible reactions about Iran?
Yeah, I think that the Netanyahu approach on Iran is very counterproductive to Israel. I remember I once heard Netanyahu when he was still prime minister and I was consul general in New England, and I was in a Jewish meeting in Los Angeles where Netanyahu said, it is 39 all over again and Iran is Germany. And I thought this is the most anti-Zionist sentence I ever heard, to say that we're in the same situation we were in 39, as if we didn't have our own state, as if we don't have some abilities, even on the nuclear side, that Iran will never have, that we have the strongest military in the region, and also what is the message that I should not raise my kids in Israel because we're going to have another Holocaust. I think Netanyahu completely exaggerated. And I'm not saying Iran is not a threat. Iran is a threat, and I think the international community should try to make sure that Iran doesn't get the nuclear bomb, because that will be very dangerous for the whole proliferation regime in general, and will definitely empower some of the Iranian proxy in the region. But the way to do it, I think, is diplomacy. I believe that the way the Obama administration created an international coalition and eventually reached this agreement with the P5+1, the 5 members of the Security Council and Germany, was the right way to deal with Iran. And we know that Netanyahu pushed Trump to withdraw from the JCPOA. And after Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, Iran got so much closer to Obama, because this maximum pressure that Trump believed in did not change the Iranian direction. On the other hand, it actually gave Iran a free hand to go for nuclear power, at least in terms of enrichment. So I think that Netanyahu is not the right person to for the interest of Israel. He might provoke Iran. He will definitely try to use the Republican Party in the US against the Biden administration choice of diplomacy. So I think that also on the Iranian front, it's not good news that Netanyahu is back to power.
Yeah, thank you. Here we have someone from Austria. He says, Shalom from Austria. Thank you very much for your speech. Concerning the idea of the two-state solution, how can the territorial frontiers be designed? How do you see the situation of the Palestinian refugee in Europe or Jordan? How do you see a union of two states?
Well, yeah, there are some issues that have to be dealt with. The 5 famous issues that are kind of the core of any Israeli-Palestinian agreement are security, refugees, settlement, Jerusalem, and but I believe that we have good answers for all of them. It's not trivial to get there, but we have good answers for all of them. There is an international consensus, and we also know that in previous negotiations, for example, between Olmert and Abbas, there is an agreement for land swaps, which mean that the Palestinian state will be in the 67 borders with land swaps, which means that they will still have 21% of the whole territory, even if the territory will look a little different. For example, with 4% land swaps, 80% of the settlers could stay in their homes. The big majority of settlers are actually in two ultra-Orthodox cities on adjacent to the Green Line, and it is not that hard to compensate the Palestinians with land somewhere else, especially next to Gaza, which is the most dense place on earth, and definitely needs more territory. In terms of the refugees, the Palestinian leadership understand that that Israel is not going to be flooded by refugees, because that goes against the two-state solution. Israel will never accept it. In the Arab Initiative from 2002, which is basically what also the Palestinian position, it says that the refugee issue should be solved in a just and agreed way, which means agreed that Israel has a veto power. So the right of return will be maintained, but the implementation will be in a way that will not change the balance, the demographic balance. And most of the refugees that want to come back will be back to the Palestinian state. And just like Israel was the answer for the Jewish refugees, including from Arab countries, the Palestinian state will be the answer for most of the Palestinian refugees. And there will be some compensation for those who will prefer to stay in other places. I do believe that it is solvable as well. In terms of Jerusalem, it's clear to me that West Jerusalem is Israel's capital and will remain Israel's capital, but there should be a capital for the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, with a much more creative agreement on the old city, on the Holy Basin, because you can't really separate that small part with so many religious places, and there should be some kind of joint sovereignty, including other players like the Vatican and Jordan, and that will run this place, but it can't really be divided. But there should be a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, in the Palestinian neighborhoods of East Jerusalem. In terms of security, there was a plan that when John Kerry was Secretary of State, he asked an American general named General Allen to come up with a plan how the eastern border will be protected when the Israeli forces will be out of there. And we have a good plan for it. It was accepted by all players except for the politicians. It will be based a lot on technology. It will be based with cooperation with Jordan and with Egypt. And the Palestinian leaders did not ask to have their own military. They accept the concept of demilitarization. So I think it is solvable as well. So I'm not saying it's trivial. It's not going to be easy, but it is solvable.
Okay, thank you very much. Richard Kerner wants to know, he says, I expect that Kevin McCarthy will invite Bibi to address the House. What is your assessment of the impact of this invitation on U.S. leadership of the international community in addressing the areas of the concern in the region?
Well, the last time it happened, when Netanyahu went to speak for Congress without coordination with the Obama administration, it was, I think, a watershed moment that turned Israel from a bipartisan issue to a very partisan issue, which is a disaster. Because as an Israeli diplomat, we always try to keep Israel out of being a wedge issue. But Netanyahu definitely made Israel into a wedge issue when he went completely against Obama and when he was in complete symbiosis with Trump. And he might do that again. I hope that there will be forces to say that this is not good for the U.S.-Israeli relations. I remember that I spoke with some people in AIPAC when that happened, and I told them that this event is going to be the end of the bipartisan approach that AIPAC at least said they they support, and that will hurt them. And I think it was the case. So I hope that there will be enough. And I also believe that if the Senate, because I think back then the two houses were in control of Republicans, so to have a joint meeting, I think you need also the agreement of the Senate, and I don't think he will get that. So I hope it will not happen, but Netanyahu will be happy to go back to the same situation he was back then, when he was the big hero of the Republicans in facing Obama.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Let's see here. How can Israel be Jewish and democratic if under the two-state solution, the Arabs demand the right of return and become a majority? Also comment on the two recent bus station bombings, please. Many thanks.
Yeah, so as I said, it is clear that Israel will not be able to accept just a free for all return, because that will definitely make the whole dream of being a homeland for the Jewish people gone. But as I said, there is a consensus, and it was also agreed by the many Palestinians who say, don't ask us to sign on the Zionist narrative. We can't give up the right for return, but we can definitely accept that the implementation of a return would be with a veto right of Israel, and that it will not be, it will be much more symbolic. It will be family reunifications. And when the negotiations between Olmert as prime minister and Abbas would never reach anywhere, because Olmert was already on his way out with his corruption issues, but there was an agreement of Abbas for the kind of ballpark number of returnees to Israel proper, and the majority of the refugees will go to the Palestinian state and not to Israel. So I think it is solvable, and there is not going to be an agreement without Israel will never accept its demographic death by just by being flooded by refugees from all over the world. It's not going to happen, but I think that we could reach an agreement without that happening. The other question was parts to the question.
Well, there was about the comments about the recent bombings.
Oh, yeah, terror is with us. I think it might remain with us. But I think that the way to deal with terror is by diplomacy. I don't think we have a really good military options, even though we are so much stronger than Hamas and from the Islamic Jihad. The way to turn them into a political parties is by diplomacy. And actually what Israel did in the last years was to always empower the terrorists like Hamas, while giving nothing to the moderate Palestinians who wanted to deal with us. So we have to fight against terrorism. I fought against terrorism in my background, but I believe that the way to eventually bring an end to it is by diplomacy and by negotiations, which doesn't mean that I'm a pacifist. We should definitely have a strong military and protect our people. But I think even most generals who are free to speak because they're not wearing uniforms anymore will tell you that most of the challenges for Israel will be solved not by military, but by diplomacy.
Okay, thank you so much, Nadav. And again, we are so appreciative that you're able to come and share your insights and reflections here with us. I'm going to now turn this over to Nicole Bryant, the Managing Director of the Program on Negotiation. She's going to describe some of the upcoming events. And again, thank you. Thank you so much, Nadav.
Thank you, Donna, and Nadav, thank you so much for this insightful discussion. I know there were lots more questions in the chat and we never have enough time to get to all of them. So appreciate everyone's interest and thank you for tuning in to be with us today. We have a number of upcoming events in the next couple of weeks. So we look forward to seeing our community for them. Larry Susskind, one of PON's vice chairs, on December 7th. Max Bazerman presenting his new book, which I will have finished by the time he comes on for our book talk on December 12th, Complicit, and Rachel Viscomi from Harvard Law School on December 14th. We look forward to seeing you at one of our many PON live events, or perhaps at one of our upcoming programs, either online or in person here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you everyone for your time and dedication, and we wish you all a very wonderful weekend. Bye now.